Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is racial segregation, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about racial segregation, Alana McLaughlin. Alana will give us some information in reference to her background, education, and her experiences, and then we'll get into the topic of racial segregation. Alana, let's first of all have you to talk about some information in reference to you and your odyssey in reference to being on this television show. I think that this is several seasons for you, and you started out as an 8-year-old child, and now you old enough to come to me and say, let's talk about racial segregation. And I agreed with that primarily because you've done such an excellent job in terms of some of the other, quote, grown-up topics that we felt that you had to deal with, and the topics that you convinced me that you were capable of dealing with, and so I fell for that, and so I'm back again with you dealing with racial segregation. But before we get into racial segregation, Alana, let's talk about your background, your education, and some of your experiences, and then we'll start talking about the topic itself.
Well, for our new viewers, my name is Alana McLaughlin, born August 27th, 2002. I went to pre-K at Napier Elementary and multiple schools after that, and I currently go to John Early Museum Magnet Middle School, where I'm in 6th grade. Now, I'm very involved in church and other activities. Actually, this upcoming summer of 2014, I'm going to be attending the Junior National Young Leaders Conference in Washington, D.C. And if you're not familiar with the conference, it is basically where children all around America come together for a 1 week in Washington, D.C., which is parents free, where you experience Washington as a living classroom instead of being just a tourist or a resident of Washington. And so I'm very excited for that. And I'm also heavily involved in my school, church, and any activity I can really get into. Like at school, I'm on our debate team, the student council, everything I can get into, really. I was previously on our STEP team, and I hope to be a cheerleader next year when I get into 7th grade. And in church, I'm on a lot of committees, the United Methodist Women's Committee, the Acolyte Committee, the Usher Committee. I try to help it when I can, because, I just feel like that's my duty on earth.
Very good. And of course, Lana, you've been involved with a lot of things. But now let's look at the topic that you're dealing with today, racial segregation. Now, what would you say about that? How would you approach that topic?
Racial segregation. When the average person would hear that, they would think, the 1900s, Martin Luther King marching, MLK, Malcolm X type thing. But then racial segregation was more than just, the Jim Crow era, or just African Americans in segregated buses or sit-ins or anything. But it was way more than that. It expanded from just African Americans, Europeans, Ukrainians, Germans, Italians, because almost every race has experienced racial segregation. Now, going as far back in African American culture, you would think slavery. African Americans were enslaved and made to work and beaten if they did something wrong, or just beaten for their slave owners' amusement. And so that's as far back as I can previously think of for African Americans. But then for Europeans and Ukrainians and Germans, the Holocaust, or in the 14th and 15th century, Europeans were segregated just like African Americans were in the 19th era. And so basically, racial segregation just expands from just African Americans to just a lot of other places, like mulattoes and Europeans and just all races, really, because at least almost all races have experienced some type of racial segregation.
Very good. And so it's really general in terms of, and is that why you wanted to talk about racial separation and segregation, not only in the United States, but racial separation and segregation all over the world, because you believe it's general and it's a problem everywhere you find it?
Because not a lot of people really know that. Like, so I could hear somebody say, oh, no, white people, they didn't experience racial segregation. It was only black people when Martin Luther King had a march for us, or the Rose Park situation. It was more than that. It was almost all races.
From that perspective, when we come back, I want you to sort of delve into what you consider to be some of the major elements and some of the major things that has to do with racial segregation and racial separation. I think you've already indicated in a real sense that it's general and all over the world and everywhere. And I think that I can say from some of the things that you've said on this program itself that you are now enlisting yourself into the war against racial separation and racial segregation.